thank you for joining the session today. It is great to have you. And we have a relatively small group, so this will be great for the community conversation format. My hope is to give you a little bit of background into who I am, but then allow you to get to talk about some interesting issues around projects for students that are with historically marginalized communities. And then I will gather some feedback from you of things that you've been thinking about. We'll put them in a whiteboard format and start thinking about solutions of how to ethically look at issues that come up around design projects with students in historically marginalized communities. I invite you to be an active participant. I'd love to hear from as many of you as possible. Just some quick definitions when I'm talking about historically marginalized communities. I think that you can think about this in the way that if your students are in a position where they have power or privilege that you're the end user of the thing that they are creating, whether it's a service or a product, does not have. Those are the kinds of relationships that I'm thinking about when having design projects in this conversation. And if anything that I say does not make sense, there's a little hand raise that I can see on all of your screens, so please don't hesitate to use that. But for students, when they think about their educational privilege or other privileges, whether it's gender or able-bodied or ethnicity or age, anywhere where there's a power dynamic between the students and then the community in which they're engaging. Those are the kinds of relationships I want to explore in student projects. And really that covers the social impact space, which is what you are all interested in. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and give you a little bit of context into who I am. So I was a graduate student many years ago at Stanford in mechanical engineering, and I took a course called Design for Extreme Affordability. And this course takes students from all different disciplines and mostly graduate students and places them on teams partnered with organizations around the world in developing contexts. And the students work with that partner organization and develop a solution to a challenge. It's a year-long program. And when I was a student, I worked with an organization called Proximity Designs in Myanmar. And they they do lots of things, but the part that I was involved with was designing products for small plot farmers to help increase crop yields. So I graduated, worked in medical devices for a little while, but eventually ended up moving to Myanmar. And I worked there for 4 years from 2010 to 2014, which was a very interesting time to be in Myanmar. And I was working on the design team, again, working on products for small plot farmers. And there were things that I learned in years 3 and 4 that I couldn't have learned in years 1 and 2. And those were both from the perspective of attitudes that I didn't realize that I had in doing this work. I wasn't fresh out of school when I went. I was 27 and I was aware of some of these dynamics like white saviorism and had read When Helping Hurts and knew those big picture concepts, but it really took some time for me to realize some of these more subtle, arrogant attitudes that I had of looking at a culture and it feeling backwards to me instead of understanding that this is just a different perspective or worldview. So I won't get too far into that. But there were pieces of that component of it from an attitude perspective, but then also parts of realizing what things I couldn't do well as a designer, jumping into that context, and how much of a collaboration this needed to be with our end users and with the local design team. And so I returned to the States from that experience feeling like I had a new understanding of what these relationships were looking like when you had somebody from outside the culture entering a new culture or context and trying to do design or thinking that they can do good design. And I had a new appreciation for needing to be on the ground or really close to end users, if not very connected to the lives of the end users in order to do that, and collaborating in order to do that work well. But I returned to the D school at Stanford and started teaching with the teaching team of Design for Extreme Affordability. So this was the class that I had taken as a student. Now I'm on the teaching team and I'm looking at these interactions where we're taking students and dropping them in these situations, and all these ethical concerns start coming up, like, is this okay? How are we mitigating this by doing X, Y, and Z. And beyond the social impact projects, at the D School, they teach design thinking or human-centered design. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with it, but at its core, you're designing with the end user in mind. You're doing research ahead of time with the end user. You're prototyping quickly with the end user. The idea is that you will ultimately create something that will be adopted more quickly and be more relevant. And so even outside of the social impact space, there were these interactions that were happening where students were jumping into somebody's life and saying, I need to learn everything about you. And sometimes those were with historically marginalized communities, sometimes they weren't, but they ended up creating some dynamics where students would come back and say, like, that didn't feel right. Like there was something ethically went off inside of me. And so I was given the opportunity to take a look at some of these interactions and what was going on. And I interviewed a lot of people in this space, design practitioners, design educators that were specifically in equity design or liberatory design, design recipients who were from groups of people in historically marginalized communities, and people from analogous fields who have been working in social impact space but weren't necessarily designers. And was able to output this booklet for educators and how to create ethical experiences. And this link to this booklet, if you're interested in reading more, was on the sign up page where you could see this session. Okay, I'm already talking more than I want to, so I'm going to move quickly. I'm now teaching multidisciplinary design at Johns Hopkins. This partners students with external partners, sometimes in a social impact space, sometimes not. So it's something that I'm aware of. And then I'm also the faculty advisor for Engineers Without Borders, where these issues come to the forefront of my mind very often. So with that all said, I want you to be able to share your own experiences and share the things that come to mind when you are creating these design projects with communities from historically marginalized communities, and be able to have a discussion about how we can do those things well. And so the question that comes to my mind first is, should we be doing this work at all? Should we be engaging in social impact projects that are ultimately learning experiences for students? Or is that doing an injustice to the end user of the project? And my guess is that a lot of you would say yes, because you are in this space and you're at the session, and that's great. And so my follow-up questions are, what are the benefits in engaging in this work? And then what are the concerns that come up for you as you do this work? And so we're going to break you out into some quick breakout rooms just for 5 minutes so that you can chat with 2 or 3 people or 1 or 2 people about what you feel the benefits are of being in this space, having students engage with communities, and then what are the concerns that come up for you as you do this work. And then we'll put those all in a whiteboard format and start talking about them. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I know you all probably just got cut off mid-sentence because that's what just happened to my partner. Sorry, Kristen. So I'm gonna move over, share my screen to a whiteboard format. And I'm interested in hearing from you. You're probably muted, but yeah, but feel free if you have something to share, you can unmute yourself. And I wanted to first start with what you feel like that some of the benefits of doing this work with students and engaging in project work for social impact, what you feel some of the benefits are.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself.
Oh yeah, I was also having problems unmuting myself.
Oh, okay.
You can go ahead.
My name is Imani Jerome. I'm the Director of Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Florida International University, and I'm the change leader there. And I was able to have a conversation with Karen, Cassie, my apologies. And we talked a little bit of, we talked about a couple of things. We both acknowledged that one of the benefits is that we want our students to have a broader understanding of, I think, perhaps what like change making even is. They can sometimes have very narrow views of what is like social impact, but it's really different when they get understanding of being able to actually go into a community and work with a community that is always experiencing a certain social issue. Because I think it's one thing to teach about social impact work theoretically, and then it's another thing to actually show them this is a community that can really use that type of framework to address these kinds of issues. So I think it's always a benefit to let students experience so much more of this type of work with the communities they're actually trying.
Nice, thank you.
I'll come back in. I was saying something pretty similar to with my partner Allison. My name's Camelot. I'm at North Central College in Naperville, and I teach a course on design thinking for social impact. And that experiential learning aspect is just a great way for them to kind of learn every single step of the design thinking of the human-centered design process. And I think that from the reviews of when they worked with the community versus when they didn't and it was all in theory, I think the students connected much more with getting the opportunity to have a hand in the change making by going into the community or working with our partner organizer and show their ideas and go through each step. And I think it was a good time for them to learn more about how to promote empathy and compassionate thinking.
Great, thank you.
I would also, hi, my name is Allison. I'm at Miami-Dade College in Miami, Florida. So Amani, we'll have to meet up in person when it's all over. But, you know, Miami-Dade College serves historically marginalized communities. We're a two-year college. We do have some four-year degrees, but we're a two-year college. And I've just found, you know, I've hosted alternative breaks. You know, we try to foster community partnerships. And I find for this population, it can be really empowering to like get out in communities and contribute, but even if it is your own community, it can be very empowering to say like, wow, like I'm capable of doing something, you know, I'm capable of making a difference. So I've found it to be a very humbling experience for myself, and they've taught me a lot about what it means to work in their own communities.
That's very cool. Nice. All right, maybe one more. Or we can also switch over. Okay, let's move over to ethical considerations. What are some of the things that, oh goodness. My whiteboard just froze. All right, well, what are some of the ethical considerations that came up in your conversations of doing this kind of work?
Well, I'm gonna jump into the conversation. Actually, I was sharing that I'm doing something similar like you, like giving class in a multidisciplinary design group. So I feel like kind of empathetic with what you're doing right now. So one of the things that I couldn't share actually on my conversation is that now with the other professor that I'm giving the class, we're thinking to have like a profile of the student that is going to be with the community next semester, because this semester we weren't like aware that there are students that actually doesn't like to work on this kind of projects. And I don't know if it's going to be a good thing for the community actually, because they are not engaging with the project. So in the beginning, when they started making conversations and we visit the community and we were trying to have this design core to see what they were going to implement, they were like, yes, we need to do this because it's part of our class. So now that they are in the phase of like the pandemic thing, they are not taking care about what is going on. They are more like in a pessimistic thing, like we don't want to continue the project because it's not going to happen because everything is bad right now. So we were sharing like the professor and I how to avoid like next semester, and it's about making a profile student to see if that works better for community, because we need to know that not every student wants to have social impact. Like probably there are other experiences that could help us for that, but making a design project that actually we want to the vulnerable communities use or have for them for their better like economic or better designs in their living place. Probably won't help if we take their students that really don't want to engage on the community. I don't know if I'm getting on the point.
Yeah, no, I understand. I think I understand what you're saying. Should all these projects just be for people that want to opt into them? And is there harm that can be done if students are not engaged in the way that maybe they should be, or taking the responsibility that they should be in working in this context? Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Other things?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't turn my video on. I'm Cassie. But my partner and I kind of touched on something as well in the breakout. I talked about just the fact that it's so quick for some of these projects to turn into something that's a little bit paternalistic or almost with a colonial mindset. If we're not really careful to just to give some context, I work in Utah. I'm a Black woman, and I work in the Center for Social Impact in a Utah university. Predominantly, our students are white. Oftentimes, the projects that we're going into are with communities of color. I've seen very often that we don't engage with adults or experts in those communities, but instead we engage only with youth in those communities and almost ignore the adults and the community leaders within those communities. And that's when I think we become in super danger of it becoming almost colonial versus us engaging and showing community leaders within other communities to our students. So I think it's one of the ethical considerations is who are we showing as the leaders? Who are we showing as experts within community development or within social impact projects? Is it just the gatekeepers within our, what's considered, I guess, traditional, prestigious areas of power, or are we showing community leaders who, are within their own communities? And then just one quick thing to add on, somebody mentioned design thinking. I also teach design thinking and train our student fellows in design thinking. One framework that we've started to adopt recently is equity design. It kind of goes beyond design thinking. It's being taught in another session here at Ashoka by the Creative Reaction Lab. It really helps to cut down on some of these ethical dangers because it forces design thinking to be through a lens of equity by acknowledging historical context and the healing necessary for a lot of communities, and also by acknowledging power constructs and power dynamics and how those affect how we engage with community members. It also involves community members not only in the research phase, so that we're not just using people and mining them for knowledge, but requires that the community members have to be a part of the design thinking process in every step.
I'm hearing lots of things here. Okay, so another, where does this keep freezing? Another, I would say big, co-design. Another big conversation here are trying to teach students, making sure that students understand the dynamics, the power dynamics that are at play here. This is a really big one for me if I have students that are going to be engaged in social impact space, that exactly what you said, this idea of co-design, being able to move through the steps of the design process, but being engaged with your end user and having them be a part of that process. And right, this also relates to your comment about feeling paternalistic. So it's not just the designer who is creating the solutions for this group of people, but instead it's this collaboration, and also from an attitude perspective, and making the overtly stating that I can't do this well myself, but that I need this collaboration. Yeah, thanks for pointing those out. And definitely for anybody that's interested, look into equity design. There are quite a few resources out there now. This session's too short, huh? Okay, what are some other ones that came up?
I just posted one in the chat, but I can also just share it here. So I work at an organization called the Student Clinic for Immigrant Justice, and our mission is fighting for a socially just immigration system. And we're doing that by providing legal representation, but we're also training students who are actually doing the advocacy work and focusing on the social transformation. And obviously there's the struggle around doing that legal and advocacy work, but there's also the interpersonal power dynamics between the students who are getting trained, those that are first generation immigrants versus those who've had their families live here for several generations. And when about half of our cohorts are normally split between those two categories, we have to think a lot about not just the work they're doing with others, but also the work they're doing amongst themselves and what that means for how they can deliver services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great one. Would you say that that falls in the category of understanding your worldview, understanding yourself personally so that you can understand how you fit into the context of your end user or who you're designing for?
I think it's also just thinking about that, right? Most projects aren't by yourself. So, and for a lot of issues in this sphere, there often are people who are coming from a lot of different backgrounds. And it's important to recognize the ethical considerations that happen when you have people who are working on these issues that come from one of those communities, whether or not the issue that you're working on impacted them directly, and people who are coming from outside communities and how people interact in those spaces. Because I think we can often see where it can be a white person taking up a lot of space, for example, and trying to dominate that project versus being an ally in that world.
Nice. Thank you. Okay, well, we did not get into solutions quite as much as I had hoped, though these things that you're posing are solutions in themselves. I appreciate that you these topics that you have brought up are also understanding the issues at play, but specifically what you then need to address with students. So thank you for sharing those. I'm wondering if, and I forgot to ask Beta this beforehand, if there's a way to track who has in this session so that I can share out the things that were discussed, and perhaps even make an open platform so that you all can be adding things to the conversation so that we can hear more of what you discussed in your groups. So I'll check back with her and we'll see if, yes.
I'm happy to share it. I'm still here. I can definitely, I'll cross-reference the permissions we got from folks and we'll send you the list. And then Alyssa, I think there's been a couple of requests in the chat box for you to post your email address as well if you're comfortable, so
Sure.
folks can reach out to you.
In fact, let me, my email address, sorry, I haven't been checking the chat. My email address is alyssa@jhu.edu, and I do have it on a slide. The final thoughts I wanted to leave you with, 2 minutes over time, was just asking the question, go, of, or just putting yourself in the position of being a bigger advocate for your end user of projects than for your students. I think as educators, we're often thinking, how can I advocate for the learning experience of my students, and trying to flip that to say, how can I be a bigger advocate for the people we're designing for, and secondarily, my students. And then I think that that forces you to be doing the same work that you want your students to be doing before they do it. And that makes you, I think, a better educator and being able to pick out when some of those dynamics are happening and guide your students to be considering power dynamics that are coming into play. So my email address is there at the bottom. We didn't get to these, but these are some of my biggest things that I rely on when I'm creating projects with end users or with social impact projects. Okay, thank you all for being here. I am going to find a way to be able to share what we've talked about with you, and then also create a open way that you can be adding to it. Is there anything else I'm missing in the chat? Okay, great. I'm also happy to stay on and talk about these things, but I don't know how strict Ashoka is about their time.
You can go. This link can stay live for about 2 more minutes, so we can go a little while longer.
Okay. All right, so that's all.
I actually wanted to put in just one thing that we've been trying to do at FIU whenever we do that type of work. Miami has a very fraught history. Allison could potentially chime in on that. So we always try to do a history lesson to the students for the areas that they're going to be working in. And we often try to get someone from that community to lead in the history. We just find it's just best when they get at least some understanding of the people in that space, where they came from. Miami's a relatively young city. Most of our areas are populated by different groups of immigrants. So knowing something of why those immigrants came to that area, when did they show up, and what their experience has been, seems to go a long way to helping the students better understand when they actually make those relationships, where it's actually coming from, and check their own privilege at the same time.
That's perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, those people I call my bridge people down here. People that can understand what the students are doing and why they're doing it, but can give context into the end user group and give some indication as to how the students are going to be perceived within that group, and be able to give history, have students be able to see their privilege in that context. Thanks for sharing that in a better way than I can. Well, one more last thought from anybody that's a best practice that's worked for you well? All right, well, thank you all again for being here.
I might suggest, I've never found a better word for this, but we do a lot of promotion for reflection, but I've come up with the term preflection. So like before students go into these
like that
experiences, you know, putting down their assumptions and their expectations, and you know, anything that they might know about this community, and kind of guiding them through to reflect on those preflections throughout the process, you know, so that they're able to see their own growth and be able to challenge their assumptions, come to terms with their expectations, and things like that.
Cool. Permission to steal that?
Absolutely. Yes.
All right, thanks everybody. This is Beta. I'm so sorry to cut this great session off short, but I'm going to have to start the next call, which unfortunately means that this one is going to have to end.
Thank you, Beta.
Thank you all so much.